So, emotions.
So I think that the main emotion that drives my work and possibly my life
direi senz'altro l'empatia.
Prevalentemente l'amore per il prossimo.
So eventually we can position ourselves in the perspective of someone else.
Sono state tante le emozioni legate agli incontri.
Che è quella della condivisione, condividere esperienze.
Le immagini della memoria non funzionano se non ci appassionano.
The emotion that makes me happy, inspiration of the creation.
This dichotomy between emotions and rationality is something that has actually dominated my life.
La sorpresa,
il fascino dello studiare il cervello.
Curiosity,
a kind of passionate curiosity.
La curiosità è un'emozione complessa.
So curiosity is an emotion that really has driven me in my work.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you in the presence and as well as via streaming for this symposium of emotions. It is an itinerary traveling from Lugano is the 9th step along the way. We are halfway in our trip into emotions whose protagonists are only women scientists. Why did we choose that? What is emotion? It's a large project. We welcome Viviana Casam. She is leading the project. Viviana, certainly, and by the way, I remind you, she is the president of BrainCircleItalia and BrainCircleLugano, which I am co-chairing. She is really the soul of this voyage, and I'd like to thank her for the passion, for the thrust, for the driving force which has been injecting into this project for a year, and I've been cooperating with her since the very beginning. So why did we invite only women scientists? Well, there are so many reasons. One of them is just a fact. In scientific conferences, in particular, neuroscientific conferences, we do have very few women. The majority is just men. Why then? Well, Viviana, and I agree with her, thinks that as experts, as practitioners, we should do a sort of mea culpa, because when we have to organize events in terms of neuroscientific conferences or prepare scientific programs on neuroscientists, we do want the best in class, and they're mostly men. We did a research, when I say we, Viviana Kazan, Daniela Perani from San Raffaele in Milan, Herman Soreka from Jerusalem University, and in-depth research. So we realize that all over the world that there are really excellent neuroscientists, women who are managing research institutes in the most prestigious academic units. So the wish for once to give them visibility, to give visibility to women scientists, because this discourse isn't just for neuroscience, it's more in general. They are the protagonists of our fora that are addressed to all of them, because the theme we chose, emotions, is a theme which concerns us all without any difference, concerns our life. It's a theme around which, along in time, so many stereotypes were created, especially around gender, which is the main theme for our evening. Emotions has got the objective to reverse some of the stereotypes that we have. First and foremost, the one which sees women historically the victims of their own emotions, visceral, passionate, incapable of having a rational thinking, while men historically have been considered the champions of rationality. Well, these are models which are repeated. If you think of Plato, he made a distinction. A woman creates with the body, a man generates ideas. This is just one of the stereotypes that we would like to reverse. There's another one, even more important, the one which considers emotions something negative, as a blocking of the mind, as a sort of a female handicap. Neuroscience today enables us to discover that emotions, first of all, depend depend on the mind. They're born with the meeting of body and mind. The mind tells me that I do have and feel the butterflies in my stomach. This is love. And emotions are very important, even for the mental processes, the cognitive processes, that sort of sparkle which creates our reasoning, our cognitive processes, and they're also very important in decision-making processes, even economic, political decisions today. We speak very often about emotional intelligence as a fundamental tool or instrument, just as the rational intelligence, a very important tool, and we realize this even more, especially at the beginning of the third millennium, because this is essential to tackle the challenges. We realize that the mindset we had so far is based on aggression, exploitment, and conquer. It's no longer tolerable. So we invited almost 50 neuroscientists. 6 are among them, 5+1. We are going to listen to their voices very soon. I'd like to thank, first of all, our sponsor. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. I thank, first of all, Sabr and Tavasagol. They are absolutely essential, great sponsors. Without them, no project would have ever been able to see the light. I thank Banca Stato. They supported our organization since the very beginning, and it enabled the implementation of the proposal that we put forward as BCR. I thank LAC, which is our generous host tonight, and I thank Delance Swiss Watch. They give us gold watches, and the revenue of the sale will finance a study grant for a young African student who'd like to follow a master in neuroscience. And I thank CTC Resourcing Solution and the Splendid Hotel. Something else that's very important, which refers to this project, and clearly this was born with the cooperation of several research institutes. First of all, EBRI, the European Brain Research Institute, founded by Rita Levi-Montalcini. And in fact, the whole cycle of emotions was dedicated to, not only because that was an extraordinary scientist, but because she spent the whole life to foster the access of women to these studies, especially in Africa, and especially in favor of the women scientists. I'd like to suggest you to watch an emotional video that was shot in 2004 in Israel, and Leti Montalcini was a 94-year-old, and this short movie gives us all the spirit of Rita Levi-Montalcini and the spirit with which we interpret our fora. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. I come from China, and my question is following. What do you think about the importance of women in future research?
You know, if I understood your question, you have never to worry about this point, because it may change one day from the other. Now women can do what I could not do when I was a young woman like you are now. So you have not to worry, or women should not, as the future may be very different from what we suspect it will be. So it is not important to believe, it is important always to act in a very ethical way, very rigorous, how you will behave, how you will face difficulty, how you will enjoy good moment, as it was for me.
When you started with research, which problem did you face because you were a woman?
For women it was very difficult, almost impossible, to be a scientist or a social person and a good mother, good wife. Should they have no interest in being a professional worker, being women, they should be raised as future mother, wife and mother. I was against this idea. So I say I will never, never be neither a wife nor a mother. But I went to my way. So I did not decide I was not a scientist. I wanted to go with Albert Schweitzer to help against leprosy, which was very diffuse at the time in Africa. And I started medicine just to cure leprosy.
Rita, what qualities do you think a scientist should have?
I am not a scientist. I am more an artist than a scientist. My twin sister died unfortunately 8 years ago, was a very twin, different from me, but excellent person and artist. My brother was a great architect. I do believe that I confront life not as a scientist, but as an artist. Never did forget that what's important in our life is to be perfectly correct, help as possible the other, never mind if you are a scientist or an artist. I do work a great deal for women in Africa, and they are very intelligent, but they have been always prevented from study by men who want to impose their own capacity, which is not better than women. Intelligence is equally well distributed between men and women, even if the approach of problem is different.
I'm from Italy, and despite my young age, I already had to go abroad working. But I have the dream to come back in Italy and help my country with my job. So you think one day I can come back and work in Italy?
Of course, you can do very well, because in Italy we have excellent people, top, really. We have no problem about intelligence. Italians are very intelligent. It's a gift from Italy and many other countries. So you can find, if you have any desire to know, you can come to see me in Rome if you want.
Do you have any regrets of what you've done in your life?
What?
About what you've done in your life, even though it's a really, you did really great things, but have you got still some regrets?
No.
Nothing?
Never.
Never.
I don't care about living long, doesn't make any difference. I do believe I had good luck to discover the NGF. Life does not end with your death. What it will survive to you is the way how you send program to other people. I mean, immortality is not your body, which of course is going to die too. I didn't care about dying, because what is important is the message that you give to other people. This is immortality of human being.
So when you discovered first NGF,
yes,
were you thinking that it would have come to have such a big importance in all the possible
No,
fields?
I knew it was very important against the dogma of the time. I was against dogma, and I said, no, we are not programmed like an insect, because everything changes depending on the environment, if good or bad. The race do not exist, the racist, unfortunately, exist. The death of people, 6 million women of Jewish people die, because not they are of inferior race. Einstein certainly, nobody would think that is inferior race. He's a race.
Video credo che restituisca molto bene non solo la
Well, I think these messages give us back the spirit of Let It Be Montalcini's message to be shared among us all and by all women who think and act in an ethical manner. EBRI isn't the only research center with which we cooperated, so many others. I remind you just the ones with which we cooperate in Switzerland, the Centre Interdisciplinaire des Sciences Affectives, one of the most important centers, Women's Brain Project, we'll hear about it, and the Neurocenter of the Italian Switzerland. And now, among us, we have the right definition. Sorry for Stetter if I mean, he's the general manager of the neurological clinic, Claudio Settler. He's going to give us his welcoming words. Good evening. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Mrs. Kazan. I have to say that I feel kind of emotional. As you said before, if you feel you have butterflies in the stomach, that's love. I'm really in love tonight. There's my wife among us, so we are safe. And emotions do play a strong role. I feel so emotional because I'm the only man speaking formally in this context. I thank you so much for the trust. Now, I thank BrainCircle for having organized this meeting. That's very interesting, absolutely remarkable, and I welcome you on behalf of our center and all those who work in the center neurology department of the Neurocenter. Our center is, of course, a research center and activities, clinical activities, mainly in the field of neurosciences. We also deal with emotions. It is true, perhaps not so much, alas. It's so nice that tonight we're going to talk about neuroscience, emotions, neuroscience of the emotions. And I have the feeling that in the past few years, in the past few months, a lot was said about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, and attribute a lot of importance to the notion of intelligence, and too little attention is paid to emotions. Neurosciences are involved in brain structures, brain functioning. Apparently, intelligence is the most important element. Possibly it is not. Certainly it is not, and the study of intelligence isn't that one which will possibly solve our issues, the problems of the world and mankind. If we want to solve the problems of mankind, if we want to improve society at large, if we want to improve ourselves, I think we should study much more the field of emotions. Therefore, I am convinced that tonight's conference is absolutely important in this respect. We've invested a lot in the study of emotions. Psychiatry, of course, has been doing that for years. Psychology as well. Neurology and neurosciences are involved in these studies as well. And they've been doing this for decades. And I hope that the development of neuroscience is so remarkable to make huge step forward in understanding emotions, in understanding also many other mechanisms of our brain functioning, so that we are able to finally make a proper revolution in this sense. I'd like to wind up here, and I thank you again for the organization of this event. I thank all the attendees, and I hope you're going to live an evening during which you learn something, and above all, you bring home emotions and your stimuli for the future, to develop these themes even further. I wish you a very good evening, and I thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia Stetter, for these precious introductory words. Having been able to listen to the director of this center involved in the brain study, we're going to have now our first host, Pamela Agazzi. However, before that, it's my pleasure to give the floor to the honorary president of Women's Brain Project, Mara Hanke-Morey. Women's Brain Project is an association, is a non-profit international association headquartered in Switzerland, aiming at promoting precision medicine, of course, gender sensitive. Thank you very much. You came from Geneva for us only, and we thank you so much.
Unfortunately, I don't speak Italian, so you'll have to take it in English. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, Viviana. This is an honor for me. I'm extremely honored to be here today in my capacity as honorary president of the Women's Brain Project. These past 2 years have forced us all to rethink our personal priorities as women, as mothers, as wives, as daughters, and as professionals. It is impossible to ignore the human toll of the COVID-19 pandemic that has paralyzed our lives and exposed the vulnerabilities in our healthcare systems. But if I may, I would like to speak about the toll it's taken on women's mental health. For centuries, as she mentioned, women had a nurturing role. We were wives, we were mothers, we were the supporting role. In the past 100 years, our social construct has changed and evolved, where we found our place in the workforce. We found it in the family, and we found it in society. But unfortunately, we have not found a balance yet. The mental stress of juggling work, the kids, the household, puts at risk our emotional and physical stability. The emotional strain of balancing all of this is apparent and has been apparent for a long time, but has been more apparent during COVID-19. As we found ourselves working from home, homeschooling the kids, taking care of the household, and of our families, we forgot about ourselves. Granted, women are known for putting ourselves first, but when it comes to health, we need to really, really put ourselves first. Ask yourself, how many times a day do you put yourself first? How many times a day do you think about your body and mind and what it needs to do to be emotionally well? I can give you a long list of people that come before me in my sort of order, but if I think of a post-COVID world, I would, before anything, like a better balance in my life. Men and women are different, emotionally and physically. And just as we should celebrate our differences, we should also be aware of the differences when it comes to brain and mental health risks. For this much and much more, I support and advocate for the Women's Brain Project. As a woman, as a mother, a wife, a sister, and a daughter. I strive to be for them the voice that is not always heard in the scientific community, but that is very important in understanding these risks and diseases. The Women's Brain Project was founded in 2016 by 3 wonderful women and 1 visionary male that wanted to change the future of medicine in brain and mental health. I've had the pleasure to support their work these 5 past years. And as they've patiently taught me, a non-scientist, I'm sorry, several diseases of the brain disproportionately affect women, both as patients and as caregivers. Yet we, women, are underrepresented at many levels of the therapeutic development process and lack specific social support. We all know mental and brain diseases are terrible for the patients, but they're also terrible for their loved ones and their support system. WBP aims to stimulate a global discussion on sex and gender determinants of female vulnerability to brain and mental disease, addressing these issues through scientific research, debate, public engagement, and advocacy. Men and women are different when it comes to disease risks. WBP aims to clearly identify these differences and leverage them for sex and gender-tailored solutions, looking toward a future of precision medicine in brain and mental health. The final aim of our organization is to establish the first sex and gender precision medicine research institute in Switzerland with global outreach, bringing Swiss precision to medicine, as Antonella loves to say. Our evolution at the Women's Brain Project has been one of hard work, growth, and great minds coming together to change the future of medicine. It is for that reason that the Women's Brain Project is honored to support and have partnered with the Emotions Forum, highlighting the incredible work of women scientists around the world. Thank you. Thank you for letting us be a part of this wonderful forum and for supporting our shared goal for a better future for my generation and those to follow. Good night.
Grazie davvero molte a Mara Moret, presidentessa onoraria di Women's Brain Project, di cui sentiremo parlare tra poco. Prima di iniziare il nostro convegno vorrei salutare Cristina Zanini Barzaghi, municipale di Lugano, la città che ci ha dato il suo patrocinio, così come ce l'ha dato il Consiglio di Stato del Cantone Ticino, e porto il saluto anche della consigliera agli Stati Marina Carobbio, che avrebbe voluto essere qui, ma non è riuscita, non ha potuto esserci. Allora, prima di parlare di emozioni, vorremmo evocarle. E quale modo migliore se non attraverso la musica? Stasera lo facciamo attraverso delle canzoni. E grazie, si stanno avvicinando i nostri artisti, con Luca Fraula al pianoforte elettrico e Michaela Calvano alla voce. Evocheremo, prego, grazie mille, evocheremo le tematiche legate alla questione di genere attraverso delle canzoni famose. E la prima canzone che Luca Fraula, che è musicista, insegnante, compositore soprattutto di musiche per il cinema, Michela Calvano, cantante jazz, insegnante, musicoterapista, giusto? La prima canzone che ci propongono è Le donne lo sanno di Ligabue.
Le donne lo sanno by Ligabue.
Solo da mettersi in pari col cuore, lo sanno da sempre, lo sanno comunque per prime. Le donne lo sanno che cosa ci vuole, le donne che sanno da dove si viene, le donne lo sanno per qualche quelle che sanno spiegarti l'amore o provano almeno a strappartelo fuori, e quelle che mancano sanno mancare e fare più male. Possono ballare un po' di più, possono sentir girare la testa, possono sentire un po' sanno chi paga davvero, lo sanno da prima quando è primavera, o forse rimangono pronte, è il tempo che gira. Le donne lo sanno com'è che son donne, e sanno sia dove, sia come, sia quando. Le donne lo sanno com'è che son donne, e quelle che sanno spiegarti l'amore o provano almeno a strappartelo fuori, e quelle che mancano sanno mancare ancora di più. Vogliono ballare un po' di più, vogliono sentir girare la testa, vogliono sentire un po' di più, un po' di più. Possono ballare un po' di più, possono sentir girare la testa, possono sentire un po' di più, un po' di più. Al limite del piacere, al limite dell'orrore, conoscono posti in cui non vai, non vai. Le donne lo sanno che niente è perduto, che il cielo è leggero però non è vuoto. Le donne lo sanno, che le donne lo sanno. Vogliono ballare un po' di più, vogliono sentir girare la testa, vogliono sentire un po' di più, un po' di più. Vogliono ballare un po' di più, vogliono sentir girare la testa, vogliono sentire un po' di più, un po' di più.
Grazie a Michaela Calvano e a Luca Fraula, che sentiremo anche in altre due canzoni. Ci hanno proposto la canzone Le donne lo sanno. Le donne lo sanno, le donne possono sentire di più, ma davvero donne e uomini sentono in maniera diversa? E ancora prima, donne e uomini hanno un cervello diverso? Questo è il tema della nostra prima ospite, Pamela Gazzi, che invito sul palco. Pamela Gazzi è neurologa, è attiva al Neurocentro della Svizzera italiana, è stata attiva in vari ambiti, dalle malattie neurodegenerative alla neurofisiopatologia, al sonno e all'epilessia, e dal 2018 è stata nominata capo servizio presso il Neurocentro della Svizzera italiana proprio per l'epilettologia. Pamela Gazzi questa sera ci illustrerà un po' lo stato dell'arte degli studi effettuati negli ultimi anni nel campo delle neuroscienze circa proprio le supposte o reali differenze del cervello tra uomini e donne. Prego Pamela.
Grazie Clara dell'introduzione e grazie a BrainCircle dell'invito. Uomini e donne hanno un cervello diverso. L'uguaglianza tra donne e uomini è fondamentale a livello sociale e politico, questo è indiscutibile. Ma tutti ci siamo chiesti almeno una volta se percepiamo le emozioni, se pensiamo, se ci comportiamo allo stesso modo oppure no, e se questo derivi da differenze nel nostro cervello. In medicina non sappiamo ancora il perché alcune malattie neurologiche e psichiatriche interessano di più i maschi o le femmine. Gli studi sulle differenze tra cervello maschile e femminile sono un argomento di estremo interesse per tutti, ma come vedremo le opinioni scientifiche sono ancora molto discordanti. Gli studi sono iniziati molti anni fa e si sono focalizzati sul volume di alcune aree cerebrali studiate mediante la risonanza magnetica nucleare, sulla quantità di neuroni, che sono le cellule del nostro cervello, e di neurotrasmettitori, che sono delle molecole che funzionano da messaggeri tra un neurone e l'altro. Sono stati effettuati degli studi mediante dei test psicocomportamentali e cognitivi, cioè dei test che sono andati a studiare le funzioni superiori come memoria, apprendimento e linguaggio. Gli studi sono stati effettuati sia su modelli animali che su donne e uomini. La prima cosa da dire importante è che quando noi guardiamo una risonanza magnetica, lo facciamo tutti i giorni all'ospedale, di un cervello, noi non possiamo distinguere ad occhio nudo se si tratti di un uomo o di una donna. Quindi gli studi sono delle minime, non visibili ad occhio nudo, e hanno
differences not visible to a naked eye or through a morphological MRI that we use every day. We also have special MRI, like the functional MRI, through which some brain areas are activated when specific tasks are performed. For example, the movement of a hand activated the region of the hand moving. This is visualized through a software changing the color in the MRI. And then other special MRI were performed studying the bundles of white substance connecting the different areas of the brain. The assumptions on the study of the difference between women and male difference between environmental factors determine differences in the structure and function of our brain, which are at the basis of attitudes, behaviors, and different roles in men and women. Biological factors are two sexual hormones on the one side, which are mainly produced by gonads, so ovaries and testicles, which are mainly estrogens in women and testosterone in men. And these hormones act on the brain. Since our life in the uterus, the brain is rich in receptors of these hormones. They are so important that the brain can synthesize them in situ. The second biological factor is represented by sexual chromosomes. Men and women are differentiated by a couple of chromosomes. Male is bearing XY, while women XX chromosome. Now I will try and talk to you about these studies. We will do we will look at these studies. I have studied them over the years, and I will tell you right away that there's still no consensus. I will show you all the criticisms at the end. So remind that what I've been said has been questioned, and at the end I will talk to you about the current theory, the most accredited one. When we read about this topic, we see these concepts I will talk to you about now. At the anatomical level, the size of the main brain is larger. Men have a more lateralized brain. In other words, it has more connections inside a single hemisphere, while women have more connections, more matter of white matter between the two hemispheres. And according to some authors, this is as the basis of the famous multitasking characteristics among women. Different brain areas were studied. For example, hippocampus, which is this area in green, which is an area which has this shape, which is in depth in the temporal lobe, which is very important for the memory, and the amygdala, which is this almond shape, which is very important in the circuits of emotions. And according to some studies, they have different size and functions. As I was saying, also neurotransmitters were analyzed, these messages of information between neurons. Here we see some studies and differences in serotonin, which is a very important neurotransmitter for mood and sleep. When we deal depression, so we use drugs acting on this neurotransmitter. According to some authors, a difference in this system of serotonin could be a cause of anxiety and depression among women. Another neurotransmitter that was studied is dopamine, very important for the response to stress and movement control. Differences emerged in these neurotransmitters, and they assumed they play a role, but this is not confirmed yet, in two serious diseases involving these neurotransmitters. One is the Parkinson's disease and schizophrenia, which are prevalent among men. Very interesting are the studies on psychology and behavior, supporting the thesis that before 1 year of age, before children are capable of recognizing their sex, they already have preferences in place. Girls react more rapidly to faces, and they speak earlier. Some authors assume that this is at the basis of biological basis of better recognition of emotional status with regard to faces. And speaking earlier is probably related to a better verbalization of emotions by girls, while boys interact with visual changes. And according to some psychological studies, women are more oriented towards people, while men towards things. And this is why there are decisions towards certain professions, more technical professions, between men and women. Cognitive tests are very interesting, and from these tests we see the most renowned discovery, and that is man appears to be more better in all visual and spatial tasks. This is shown by a very simple test of a mental rotation of an object that should be visualized, and you should say that if it is the same object or not. And men are more capable at and more reactive, and they have a better orientation in the labyrinth test. And they have a procedural memory, that is the memory that we activate when we perform tasks like driving, and where we don't have to repeat in your head, and we do things automatically. And according to some studies, also men are more capable in mathematics, and this aspect was not confirmed. However, according to some studies, this is at the basis of a digital gender gap that exists in some countries. At the cognitive level, women appears to be better with regard to language, verbal memory, in writing, reading. They have a better fluency, a better explicit memory, a better recovery of long-term memory as well. While with regard to labyrinth test, women orient themselves by having points of reference. When we talk about emotions, we should also mention the autonomous nervous system, which is involuntary. It has a central brain control and connections with all our organs. And when we feel an emotion, the first sign comes from the autonomous nervous system, the one that makes our heart beat faster, makes our hands sweat, or makes us feel like goosebumps. And so some studies showed how with this system, which has a balance, the heart accelerates, reduces the heartbeats, there is sweat, salivation. This balance, with this nervous system, in this system, men are more active to the orthosympathetic system, which is increasing pressure, dilating the pupil, or reacting to a threat, while women have more a parasympathetic system active for relax and recovery to a balance. Several studies on emotions tested the heartbeat, sweat, and the response of the autonomous nervous systems to emotional stimulus with very different results. From the studies I just mentioned, it shows that there should be two categories of individuals. Biologically determined, biology would have a primordial memory driving our behaviors. And these studies support the theory of sexual dimorphism, two brains, a female brain and a male brain driven by biology. That these differences are relevant and they have a meaning from an evolution standpoint to ensure survival of the species. All of these studies had a major mediatic impact with books and articles, and it was also women are less prone to mathematics, and that is not true. And the differences between men and women are in the brain. And then we say first census of brain made on mice. And so these authors of the past years reanalyzed all of these studies I just mentioned, and they saw that they have many weak points. And from a biological theory, we make us think that maybe the environment has a major impact on our brain, and they lead us to the mosaic or multimorphism model. These are the criticisms. These data are made on small groups with minor differences and contradictory results. So it's very difficult to see that, in other words, the size of the brain is in relation with the size of the person. and the hands and feet are bigger in men. So it's normal that also the brain is bigger. And then the connections, from what we know, also this has to do with size. A bigger brain, connections and transmissions of nervous impulses on a long bundle is less effective, and so there are intermediate steps. It's not a matter of gender. And then all psychocognitive tests are influenced by expectations. It depends on the expectations, on the gender stereotypes to which we are subjected till our early age. And so we will talk about later on, and we see how women respond to empathy tests by responding to the expectation of the gender stereotype. Also with regard to math, we've seen that if women are shown a test telling them that there is a math test, we know women are less prone to math, but this test they perform worse rather than if they are not told about this test. So they respond to expectation and to gender stereotype. The environment plays an important role. We are influenced by gender stereotypes since our early age. Our brain is very plastic. Our brain can change function and structure even during the adult life, and it is influenced by our living environment. This is what we've seen in this famous concept of the man that is more oriented. And we've seen that even young girls who are trained with video games as a Tetris, where there is a spatial orientation, they have scores similar to the ones of boys. Very important, hormones, sexual hormones, testosterone and estrogens are socially modulated. They are not something fixed or rigid, but they modify depending on the environment. We've seen that testosterone reduces in caring for children and increases in competitive environments. Studies on plasticity, what is important is the one performed on the London test, having to study the maps of London, and they've seen that their hippocampus at the end of this period was changed. Very interesting also to see, to understand how plastic our brain is, that fathers with mother functions, raising their children without a mother figure, activated the same emotional and cognitive circuits related to oxytocin, which is the hormones of birth and delivery, and the one of hugs of women. So our brain adapts to the environment and responds to the need of our environment. So our biology is modified. So we don't have two separate brains, but a brain which is like a mosaic with female and male characteristics, which can be adapted depending on the environment we live in. This applies which is shown by MRI. This chart shows thousands of MRI. Every line is an MRI, so a brain. The different columns are the brain regions, and they were divided, and the female and male characteristics in blue, pink and white, and we see a mix of characteristics of blue and pink or white. And the same applies to psychological tests, where we've seen that tests analyzing personality, attitudes and interest traits, also related to gender stereotypes, show that most people have all the female and male characteristics. So we all have female and male characteristics. So, to conclude, some of these are myths. Biological sectors exist, they are important, they have an influence on our brain, hormones, sexual chromosomes, but things are more complicated than that, as they've been described so far. There is a continuous interaction between different variables. The environment plays a key role. Hormones can are adjusted depending on the environment we live in, and the epigenetic, also the expression of our genes changes depending on our environment. So two twins, monozygote, living in different environments at a given point in their life, they will also appear differently because of a different expression of their genes. There are no two categories of brains, but there is important overlapping and variability. Most of the brains is unique, and it has female and male characteristics. Each one of us has all of these potentials. This is what matters. The studies in the past were very brave, but I think that in the future we should start from new assumptions, not the ones we used starting from stereotypes, but we should start from the diseases characterizing men and women, and maybe in this way, going backwards, we can understand more. This is a quotation from Carlo Rovelli saying that we interact with the world with our brain. We are immersed in this world, and we exchange information continuously. And this applies also for our way of interpreting the role of men and women in our time, where we and also in living our emotions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela Agazzi, for such an exhaustive presentation, such a clear presentation. Maybe the conclusion is, well, we should change conversation, no longer differences, instead characteristics linked with the extraordinary organ, the brain, a mosaic. There aren't two equal brains in the world. Everyone has got his or her own unique brain, which is a mosaic. I would say that possible questions for Pamela could be put forward, and we are kind of late in our program. You can put the questions later. Now I have the great pleasure to invite Antonella Santochonachada. She's a neuroscientist. She is a pathologist. She's a physician, Alzheimer's expert, co-founder of Women's Brain Project. So she's co-founder and CEO of Women's Brain Project, a member of our scientific committee in our circle of Lugano. She's working at Biogen, and she's also been working at Swiss Medical, the EU Commission on Health, World Health Organization, several different organizations working for the Alzheimer's disease. She's been named a Woman of the Year in Business, and she received a World Sustainability Award for outstanding contributions to sex and gender-oriented precision medicine. This year, she published a volume along with Maria Teresa Ferretti entitled A Headless Girl, where she explores the mental illness and discover differences between men and women. She's going to give us an overview on the growing interest in the neuroscience area in terms of gender differences in medicine. Thank you. You have the floor. Thank you, really, for this beautiful introduction. Now, first of all, I would like to start with my personal thanks. I'd like to thank the committee, which is really at the basis of the Emotions Forum, in particular Viviana, Kassam, and Clara, who guided me, who really was so helpful for me, and it was a joy for me so far. Having said that, I think I should disclose something. That is my own affiliation. I work for Biogen, a biotechnology company. As Clara said, I'm also co-founder of Women's Brain Project and current CEO. I'm here to tell you the work of our organization, not necessarily what I will tell you represent the position of the other organizations I'm affiliated with. This is just a disclaimer, so to speak. Having said that, I would like to thank Viviana even further and once more, because this is my personal thanks, and also on behalf of all neuroscientists who work so intensely and relentlessly to understand the functioning of this beautiful organ, which is the brain. This forum is visionary in this sense, is unique and pioneering in its nature and organization. So thank you all on behalf of all the people like me who deal with neurosciences. Having said that, I'd like to tell you how sex and gender are biological variables which have to be considered with regard to clinical development of therapeutical solutions. However, before telling you all these things, I am here to make another premise. What do we mean when we say the word sex in medicine, and what is the meaning of gender? Sex is our genetic heritage, the thing which is encrypted in our DNA. When we talk about gender, we mean the construct which society builds around an individual to make him or her a woman, a man, or all the other nuances that can be present between these two extremes. Now, having said that, why then sex and gender is particularly important for brain diseases and mental illnesses? Well, it's a matter of numbers. As Pamela said, it's a matter of prevalence and incidence rate of the disease, which means there'll be diseases more predominant among women and other diseases which will be more predominant among men with regard to brain and the mind. Well, let's make a few examples. First of all, Alzheimer disease. Alzheimer is essentially a feminine. 70% of Alzheimer patients are women. Same thing for depression. 80% of patients, anxiety, 80% of patients are women. Migraine is a woman's disease. Meningioma is a tumor which is prevailing among women. The anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, well, is ADHD. It's new because it was described and classified as such in 2007. So we are talking about, not long ago. It's a disease which prevalent among women, almost exclusively among women. And, well, previously it was recognized as a woman possessed by the devil, hysterical women. These very young women were really put into a hospital where they should die, or where they died. If they survived, they would have had sequelae that were so negative and fatal. What do we know about this disease? We discovered that paradoxically benign tumors in some cases, and luckily very rare cases, produce antibodies which will hit the brain and will really surround it. There'll be a psychotic symptom, even coma and death. People used to talk about a woman possessed by the devil in these cases. Why? Because during autopsy, the teratoma, this benign tumor, was analyzed, and within such a tumor, which starts from embryon tissues, were found teeth, eyes, hair. What was that? The brainchild of a sexual intercourse with the devil. So not long ago, alas, in some regions of our world, it's still the case. I myself was able to handle such clinical cases where it took us months working with neurologists, psychiatrists, specialists in internal medicine to understand it was an encephalitis. It was an ADHD. That's the problem. Let's talk about male. Well, even among male, there are diseases which are predominant vis-à-vis women, like Parkinson's disease or lateral sclerosis. This is, again, a matter of numbers. However, is this a number only, or should we consider other aspects? Well, let's start from risk factors. Based on sex and gender, there'll be an individual will be prone to a disease or another. And why this? Because we are exposed by our occupation to certain environments. Let's think of those who work with asbestos. Well, mostly they were men and they had mesothelioma, or caregivers. Most caregivers are women, and they do have a role in societies as caregivers. So those who care. If you are a caregiver, you are at risk of developing depression and senile dementia. These are very important facts to consider. And this reflects also on the presence of biomarkers in our brain. What we know, for instance, in Alzheimer disease, is that for the same level of amyloid protein, the protein which accumulates 20 years before the first symptom, for the same level of amyloid, women will have more deposits of tau protein, the one which is downstream this amyloid, which is a neurotoxic protein, which determines the neurodegeneration. Let's talk about the symptom. We know that in Parkinson, well, men will suffer more than women of this motor blockades, will have an awareness more compromised, or cognitive performance compromised. And this is a risk to their functions, motor functions, and also in terms of how the brain works and the speed at which it works. Therapeutic answer. I have another factor. Zolpidem, to sleep well at night, it is should be given with care to women at lower doses, because women then will encounter side effects according to which they will feel confused, dizzy, as if they had drunk too much, the hangover. Sbornia, says the speaker, and says, I'm sorry, it's the first Italian speech that I give. It's the first time that I speak in my mother tongue. The so-called sbornia, hangover, being drunk. Do you know how we were able to see that effect, which is mostly present in women? Because they had car accidents. They ended to ER, and that's why. We wonder why. Because they took too much zolpidem. Should we reach that point? This is my question. Obviously, this has a value, and it also affects the treatment. Women are better than men in terms of following a therapy, and also new technology. Certainly women are more neuro and new technology friendly when we speak of digital innovation to introduce into treatments. Recapping, gender-sex differences, well, it isn't so much who is the best one and park the car. It's very important in terms of diseases as well. We talk about diagnosis and prevention, and also treatment, and what it means to develop a clinical trial. Well, the colleague so brilliantly said the reasons at the basis of these differences, so many. We heard about genetics, our genes, the evolution of the species, the microbiome. Well, we can think of the very formation of gonads, or, the effect which hormones may have at the level of the brain. Another thing that, in my opinion, may have a remarkable value is sleep. We know women may have more problems vis-à-vis men in their ability to have a good night's sleep. Why? Because women have the pregnancy, childbirth, milk. I mean, I learned with my own boys when they were very young. I started to sleep well when they were 4-year-old. Same thing happens during premenopausal periods and postmenopause. Here again, sleep troubles occur. Why? Because studies show that these neurotoxic proteins, key for the development of neurodegenerative diseases, these proteins are removed during sleep, and probably this hormonal effect has got its own reason. The advice is to educate people to sleep well. Having said this, why is this important? Why? Why is this essential in psychiatry and neurology? Why? Because in psychiatry and neurology, very often a symptom is the same, despite the underlying disease differs. What does it mean? It means that when I was working in the psychiatry ward and I had to see a patient, well, I saw this person depressed, and I was wondering, is this a proper depression or something else? Because very often, and I repeat, a symptom is common. However, the underlying disease is just another matter. A Parkinson's disease may appear as a depression initially. Same thing with Alzheimer's patients. Very often, the women who suffer from Alzheimer's disease, well, they are diagnosed later, of course, because women compensate with their own verbal reserve. They mask the cognitive lacunae or deficit. Very often women come to the doctor and feeling depressed. They are being treated for a couple of years with antidepressants, and then all of a sudden you discover that was the very start of a dementia. Now, it's very important. And what is even more complex in this scenario, it's this, something else is true. Very often, the same presence of biomarkers upon histopathology will show different symptoms. It happened to me so many times in my own ward when I thought a patient had a cortical basal degeneration with, of course, symptoms according to which the patient leaned like the Tower of Pisa, had problems in walking and had a very good memory. And then upon histopathology, that was a real Alzheimer. And you said, well, I didn't understand anything. Because we are talking about precision medicine, we shorten diagnostics. In psychiatry, it takes us years to reach an exact diagnosis. For instance, this is the time to diagnose that we need in order to reach a specific diagnosis. In highly developed countries, multiple sclerosis, 2 years, Parkinson, 1 year, Alzheimer, 2 years. I don't know what may happen in countries like Switzerland. We were really fond of this theme. We made it the very center of our activities at the center. We focused on Alzheimer, how we deal with so many other diseases. We were the first ones and say that we had to study this. We were pioneering in 2018 when we published our first case study. They said, what are you doing? Are you joking? We opened our Pandora box and we actually saw an explosion of scientific publications which study the differences in brain and mind diseases. We are really proud of this. We wrote a book, you see there, The title is Alzheimer's Disease and Sex and Gender, under Sex and Gender lens. We invited and talked to many worldwide and important experts, and we started a revolution also in terms of the big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies, those who would like to work with us because they want to learn. There's something else we recently saw. This is a JAMA publication. The number of women recruited in studies for Alzheimer's disease. We compared them, these numbers were analyzed, looking at tested medicine or drugs or medicine being developed or under development. While in the past we had more women, and we had a good percentage of women representing 70%, I mentioned before, who may get the Alzheimer's disease. We reached the 50%. You could say, well, 50%, we talk about a very slow and chronic multifactorial diseases and very complex diseases. If we don't have the right target group to analyze, representing the real population, well, possibly we lose some important information. There's another piece of information I'd like to offer to you. The 50 publications we analyze in order to reach the result, clinical studies, I mean, well, only 7 mentioned the results of the analysis based on sex and gender. Practically nobody talks about it. Nobody does anything. This is even more serious because this is a preclinical research with mice. There, sex and gender differences, that's a taboo, as if female and male mice were the same thing. Or possibly they say, well, female mouse, you know, this is difficult to study, and actually, women do have their own menstrual cycle, and we have to analyze this. Women affected by Parkinson, there is a reversal. I mean, different indication. More younger women show Parkinson's disease symptoms. What we learn with our patients, we put patients at the center, is that symptoms change according to the menstrual cycle, according to the periods. That's very important to handle a patient. Now I come to the conclusion, and this is the medicine of the future, digital medicine. I have 3 final slides. This is the first one. Currently, thanks to the discovery of the University of Zurich, we have reached the possibility to diagnose with a good safety margin the Alzheimer's disease based on a device which we have, our cell phone, an iPad. Thanks to augmented reality, by testing people in 15 minutes, we understand whether the brain will be a normal brain or with a deficit in terms of cognitive performance, or Alzheimer's disease brain. We verify how long it takes us to create circles on the screen of our cell phone. So I asked these people, it took me 5 years to convince the CEO, Tamaris, to look at this data, and asked, could you please look at your device? Could you please tell me whether your device recognizes whether my brain is blue or pink? And he said, no, I have more important things. And after 5 years, he calls me and says, look, we made it. We were able to look at this, the classifier, without knowing, of course, the sex of the person being tested, with a level of accuracy that's very high, 70% or more, was able to understand whether the brain of the person being tested was the brain of a female or a man, regardless of the age of the subject. Age wasn't a factor. Just to tell you, what do I mean? What we do not understand with our own eyes or with a neuropsychology test, something we do with the patients, would probably be understood by the future medicine, the digital medicine. So our call to action is the following. These differences should be analyzed, taken into account. We should also create ethical debates on the importance of all this, and eventually even understanding, when we develop the algorithms, the ones I showed you before, why a given algorithm makes a certain decision. Make it explainable to the person observing the results, understanding whether this solution can be applied to everyone and all, or it'll be only useful for me or the person next to me? Well, and now let's go back to what Clara said and the other rapporteurs evoked. Precision medicine, in my opinion, will be fledged when we'll stop talking and stop talking about differences, and we'll be able to clarify the notion of characteristic, and when gender and sex will be just another characteristic to analyze within the ethnic group of the individual, a weight, where this person lives. This will create big data. This will become precision medicine, and the institution we want to found will certainly be involved in this precision medicine. Swiss precision applied to medicine. Thank you so much.
Bravissima Antonella. Grazie davvero per questa bellissima esposizione su un tema molto importante. La medicina del futuro in realtà avrebbe dovuto essere la medicina perché sì, si stanno facendo grandi passi in avanti, però si tratta in realtà di capovolgere un intero paradigma su cui è fondata tutta la medicina, tutta la farmacologia da sempre. Il modello è maschio, bianco, quarantenne. Tutta la medicina, tutta la farmacologia è fondata su questo paradigma. Però, come ci ha spiegato Antonella, si stanno facendo tanti passi in avanti non solo nel campo neurologico, ma anche nel campo cardiologico. Le prime evidenze di differenze importanti tra sintomi tra uomo e donna sono nate nel campo della cardiologia. Abbiamo tempo per una domanda adesso, poi magari daremo spazio più avanti per altre domande. Viviana Casan vuole porre una domanda secondo me importante.
Volevo chiedere, noi abbiamo visto nella ricerca del vaccino che c'è stato un vaccino che aveva delle ripercussioni negative soprattutto mainly on women and young women in particular, and that was a major problem at the psychological level. Do you think that happened because there was no specific research by gender and on the effect this vaccine could have had between men and women?
Allora, io posso dire che appunto il lavoro del Women's Brain Project è finalizzato anche a capire esattamente questo. In realtà la problematica relativa ai vaccini,
the side effects of vaccine is a known problem. All vaccines
una predisposizione a creare
a predisposition creating side effects mainly among women.
Si parla per esempio dello shock anafilattico in tutti i vaccini attualmente
associated to all vaccines for COVID,
quasi esclusivamente nelle donne.
They all happen among women. The anaphylactic shock is something serious. It's not just like
detto questo, alla tua domanda perché questo accade, certo, perché purtroppo non ancora c'è quell'attenzione necessaria a far sì che durante la fase 1 e la fase 2, ma anche nella conoscenza clinica, si prenda in considerazione questa differenza
this difference is taken into account, the difference that there is between men and women, not only in the diseases affecting the man and the brain, the mind and the brain, but also in COVID, in all vaccinations. Our call is really to focus on a precision medicine so that in the very early development stages, in the development of a disease, of a drug, these aspects is taken into account. I've learned this because I worked for 4 years and a half for regulators, and I've seen data, raw data, and this is why we created our WBP project. Thank you very much,
Bene, a questo punto diamo la parola
we give
alla nostra
the floor to our next guest, Giorgia Silani, neuroscientist. She's from Vienna. She
ha lavorato presso diversi centri
with several research centers in the area of social neuroscience in London, Zurich and Trieste. And since 2014, she is heading the Clinical and Social Neuroscience Unit at the University of Vienna. Her research focuses on neurobiological basis of social cognition, emotions and behavior. She's a world expert on empathy. We all know what empathy is, this ability of empathizing empathizing with another person, this is social intelligence, and she will talk to us about empathy. So she will explain to us what it is. There are two main components in the empathy, the cognitive, which was the least studied, and she will tell us if gender has an impact on how we can have empathy with others. Giorgia Silani, the floor is yours.
Allora, innanzitutto volevo ringraziare per questo evento che è davvero eccezionale, però lascerò alla fine i ringraziamenti così almeno un po' più di tempo per parlare, perché anch'io di solito do sempre i talk in inglese, quindi in italiano tenderò a parlare troppo. Allora, parliamo dell'emozione sociale dell'empatia. Cos'è l'empatia? L'empatia è una parola di cui si è parlato tantissimo, che tutti più o meno hanno idea.
We all know what it
is.
It is rooted in Greek.
Probabilmente anche questo è conosciuto da tutti quanti, da
empatheia, from empatheia, composed N inside, pathos, suffering and feeling, and it is used to describe this connection, emotional connection between the actor and the audience. Over the years, it was used in psychology in the 19th century, and in the common, in our everyday life, we know what empathy is. Empathy is a lot of things. As you can see on the screen, it is related to many synonymous and phenomenon which are not always the same thing. We talk about compassion and sympathy, understanding, emotions. Empathy is all of these things. When we talk about empathy and when we talk about all of the other aspects, we create in neuroscience a lot of confusion because we don't know what we should investigate. I would like to give you a definition that was given in 2004 by two important women who did a lot of studies on empathy, a philosopher, Miss Vigneron, and neuroscientist, Ms. Singer. They define it in order to characterize not only what it is, but what it is not. And this is what I will use in my definition of empathy. We are in a status of affection, state of affection. It's not a cognitive, there is an affection, there's affection involved. This state is isomorphous, meaning that it is the same emotion, feeling the same emotion that the other person is feeling. This is different from compassion and sympathy. Compassion and sympathy are emotions which arise following the perception of another feeling. I see that you are suffering, I feel pity for you. This is sympathy. While empathy is I feel your exact suffering and your exact happiness. This difference is key. Another element that Clara was mentioning, which is not studied enough, and little considered in our everyday notion, is that we are aware that it is the other person, the source of our affection. So there is a distinction between our emotion and the other person's emotion. Empathy without the awareness that it is the other is emotional contagion. If you are emotionally contagious, you are not connected with the other. You are only focused on yourself. So what you are feeling is the same emotion that the other person is feeling in front of you. Neurosciences tried to artificially separate these two elements and to study them and see how the brain shares affection, but also how it distinguishes ourselves from others. So they try to make experiments trying to assess these two separate components. The study, which was the first one studying the affection part of it, is of the neuroscientist Tanya Singer. She had the genius idea at the time of putting in an MRI machine two people. One of the strongest emotions that can be repeated over time without getting used to, that is pain. If you receive a pain stimulus, you may discuss if the pain is an emotion or not, but your brain responds in the same way, does not get used to it. So what they did in this study is to attach electrodes, sending an electric discharge to the hand of the wife inside the MRI machine and to the hand of the husband who was outside the machine, and see how both brain responded when one of the two felt pain. But also when seeing an arrow showing that it is your husband receiving pain and you are not receiving any pain. This is an example of the paradigm that was used. They see an arrow showing who of the two is receiving the electric shock, and the dot when the electric current is delivered. So they only see that something is about to happen, and they know who is the target of this stimulation. And what she did is to check how the brain responded to my pain, but also to her pain and to the perception of pain of the person standing next to me. So there is a so-called simulation mechanism. These are areas of the brain, like the front part of the brain, girdle, and so the affection part of the pain is represented when I think of you in experiencing that pain. And this has a very strong correlation at empathy level that I feel. If I feel empathy, this simulation of the emotion of the other in my brain is much stronger. This is affection sharing. So we feel the same. I feel the same emotion. What has been done is the distinction between self and other. Two people were trying to create a discrepancy between the emotions and asking one person how the other person is feeling. For example, I'm in front of you giving a speech. My conference is a disgrace, but the person before me was brilliant. And so how do you think the person who presented before you feels? In order to respond correctly to this question, I have to separate myself from what I'm feeling now and try and feel how the other person is feeling. We did this experiment. We induced emotions through touch. People doing the same task together. We've seen two images. One was referred to the object they were touched with, and the other to the object that the other person was touching, in order to induce a feeling of pleasure and discomfort. These two could be both positive or negative or different. What we've seen is that our brain and our behavior makes mistakes when we are feeling a different emotions. We try and attribute to the other person how we feel, and that there is an area in the brain, and this one in the association cortex, supramarginal cortex, helping us going beyond our emotions, own emotions. If we didn't have this area, we would be even more focused only on ourselves. So we have to talk about gender now. What do we know about these two affection and gender components? We know very little. I think Pamela made a very nice presentation on what we know about the function of the brain. We know very little because, unfortunately, very few studies were made trying to compare the two. or either everything. If you look at the differences and the sample is too small, or they said, let's only look at women because they are more empathic, or maybe we should all look at men who are much less empathic. And so no major study was conducted on this. What was done instead is that there are differences, there are similarities and differences. For example, in this study, the same described earlier, one person was in the MRI machine, the other was outside, and other two people were given this electric discharge, and they were described as pleasant or uncomfortable feelings. So there were people associated to their feelings. And what they've shown that people, you have similarities. The brain of men and women respond in the same way. If you see the person you like receiving electric discharge, if you feel the same emotion and you represent it in your brain. But if the person, you don't like the person in front of you, men don't respond at all, while women do respond, even if they, to the pain of the other person, if they don't like that person.
Mentre la donna comunque, anche se è una risposta inferiore, ha una risposta. Poi dopo discuteremo.
Then we will discuss what all this means. What happens in the difference between self and other? Well, it depends on the situation. There are differences. In some specific cases, what we've seen is that under stress, the stress situation, which in this case is created by the social stress or having to give a speech before an audience, where you don't have smiling faces like you, but there are some angry or serious people in front of you creating this stress, men and women respond differently. If you remember this bias, which is the difficulty in differentiating between self and other.
Sotto stress. Le donne sono
not under stress, women
nel differenziare il se stessi dagli altri. Forse sono
cannot differentiate self from other. They have more problems, while in men the bias is lower. Under stress, the opposite is true. Men become more self-centered, men become more self-centered, while women don't. This may have several interpretations. This data was interpreted by the fact that under stress, the body try to tackle the problem, while women have in a condition of danger tend to look for help outside themselves. Well, for the opposite is true for men. Is this something biological? Maybe not. Maybe it's only social. Men are raised with the idea that if they have problems, they have to deal with them, while women are brought up with the idea that if they have problems, they can look for help. So all of these differences that we see in the brain from a behavioral point of view we should still understand how much biology has to do with it, or culture rather has to do with it. We should maybe have a society without a gender stereotype. I think it could be possible. And to conclude, the two last slides. We are working in Vienna on this, that is asking something different, not only if there is a difference from an empathy standpoint between men and women, but there is a different empathy towards men and towards women. There could be differences, and we studied this in the context of the sexual objectivation. We are studying this right now, which means being a person treated and perceived just like for the use of others, rather than a person capable of her own will. This is true because we are bombarded by messages from advertisements. Women are represented as a sexual object in commercials to the benefit of men, in video games, in dolls, everywhere. It's everywhere, really. And of course, someone realized that and said, of course, maybe we should look at this phenomenon more in depth. It has been known for years, and it has impacts. It has impacts on empathy. A study was conducted, and we presented sexualized women where their body was more visible, and the breast and the hips and legs were visible, with the women that were more covered. And what we've seen is that the empathic sharing or affection sharing is reduced towards these people. These were excluded from the game. And our ability to simulate the pain of these people was reduced just because they were dressed differently. And this is crazy if you think about it. It is an automatic mechanism. We feel less empathy, and we don't know why. We're trying to understand that. Does this only apply to women? We don't know. We are trying to figure that out. We're studying this for men. Sexualized men are much more prevalent now. If you see the body of a man a few years ago and now, there are more boys with visible muscles. They want to show their muscles and shoulders. These are signs of sexualization, not only for women, but also something else is changing in men. Why is this changing? Because this reduction of empathy, but one of the mechanisms is the fact that we pay attention to different parts of the body. This is a representation of the eye focusing on certain parts of the body. The red parts are the area of men or women not sexualized, and in blue the ones more sexualized. If a woman is not sexualized, you look at the face. The same for a man. When both are sexualized, people look more at the breast and shoulder. And this change of eye focus simply from the face to the rest of the body diminishes the ability to empathize. We are trying to do our best to understand this better. Thank you for your attention.
Are there any questions? Stay here. Thank you very much, Giorgia Silani. Do we have any? I have a question, first of all. Thank you very much, first of all, for this beautiful presentation. Thank you for having given us insight and something new, which is very interesting, by the way. An important message of your presentation is that, well, since empathy is made up of two aspects, cognitive, affection, you can burn empathic, but you can certainly become empathic, don't you think? Certainly, yes. Can we learn? Yes, as I said. What happens in terms of development of a human person? Affection sharing is inborn. We are biologically prone. If you think of babies, newborns, when they feel, and young children, when you feel your baby with problems or screaming, there is an emotional contagion since the very start. What you can develop as well is to understand that what I'm feeling now is your emotion. This is a fundamental aspect of empathy. Without that, there's no empathy whatsoever. The ability of making a difference between a self and the other can be trained. And also distinction between myself, between self and the others. I was trained as a psychotherapist. They do not only teach and feel third parties or everybody else's emotions. What you feel, is this your own emotion or somebody else's emotion? So the answer is yes, indeed. However, it is easier. I mean, you don't need to train the affection. You need to train your brain, the cognitive part. That's an important measure. Thank you. Another question, and maybe if you have questions from the floor, before the pause, there'll be sort of buffet in order for us to have a break, in order to digest, so to speak, all the things we heard. I have a question, Giorgia. You don't talk about the mirror neurons. It's an Italian discovery. What's the role of such neurons in empathy? Well, it's the same thing. You know, the mirror neurons are the mechanism which is the basis of all the simulation. The mirror neurons are found in the motor area, while this is in the affection area. However, the basic mechanism, the property is the same, simulating in the first person what you perceive. Same thing. Mirror neurons are an exceptional discovery which has a sort of negative fame, because during years they were used to explain everything, perhaps too much. When there's a certain abuse of a terminology, people just say, well, stop it, I don't want to listen about them anymore. It's a pity, because it's at the basis of any simulation, as oxytocin, which was certainly the golden word, and then the word said, no, stop it, because I can buy it through the internet, you know, which is not the case. Now, let's see whether we have other questions from the floor. Someone who would like to put a question. There'll be time, of course, after our break. There's a hand raised there. Thank you for these magnificent presentations, and thank you to all the speakers. My question, do we have any interesting studies on the ethics, on the ethical aspect? And I refer to the previous question put by Clara. To what extent my own disposition to say, yes, it's good to feel empathy, to what extent this may have an actual resonance with my own empathy? Well, this is certainly a fundamental element. We speak about empathic motivation, to what extent you are motivated, and feel other person's emotions. This is a fundamental element, I think. We do not feel empathy of everybody surrounding us. I mean, there's a sort of selection, automatic selection, or a top-down selection, more aware in this sense. Certainly the motivation, that is making an effort, to make it, is a fundamental to feel empathy. I don't know whether this was your question or whether you'd like to know something else. Yes, certainly. I'm referring to possible tests or experiments. Claudio Stadler has a question? Yes? Question on empathy, the difference in terms of gender. Empathy is seen as positive. There are authors who say empathy not necessarily is a positive feeling. Empathy may play an important role in society. Think about dictatorships. Empathy, let's say, towards a dictator. This might play an important role from a neurobiological point of view. What do you think about this? And do you think that between men and women, or are there any gender differences in this case? Historically, we know that men and women take a different approach vis-à-vis a dictator, dictatorships, totalitarianisms. Well, this is a very timely question, so to speak, to the point, and spot on. Empathy comes from the fact, well, there's been so many uses of this terminology. Empathy as a movement of affection is useless. It can also be negative. You say empathy towards a dictator, meaning, yes, empathy or neurobiological mechanism behind are those which enable you to wear the same shoes. I mean, to identify not necessarily into something positive. We see that a little bit in the no-vax movement. I mean, there's a sort of identification with a certain styles and mannerisms, a sort of empathic identification. I mean, I'm not a specialist, sorry. Could it play a role? Yeah, it could be the, so to speak, in my courtyard effect. You identify in all those who are similar to you. Too much of this attitude that is only in my garden, in my orchard, it's because you then do not feel any empathy at all towards people different from you. Per se, this is not negative. Empathy is not negative, especially if it means ability to represent and to wear other people's shoes. We very often stop at the very first step. We feel emotions and do not share them with the other, which doesn't foster the empathy towards someone who's not part of our group. Are there any differences between men and women? Well, sincerely, I don't know. We only took men into consideration in the first part of our studies. We are not looking for any complications. And there we saw a very strong role of the in-group and out-group, strong reduction of empathy and affection sharing towards the out-group. In my opinion, you can feel empathy towards anybody, but you have to be able and represent, let's say, the other person. If you stop at yourself only, that's no longer empathy. This is where the problem is. Very well. Now, I think we can certainly break for a few minutes. This buffet is offered by the sponsor. I have to say something very important for us. Among the very many things which are important for our fora, we have realized and manufactured T-shirts. There is an important artist, Michael Roffner, who made a work of art for us only. We printed them, and it's a limited edition. So I invite you, Antonietta Mira, the responsible of the scientific committee of BrainCircleLugano. Well, look at the T-shirt she's wearing. We sell it. Our association is a not-for-profit organization, and these T-shirts, as you can see, it's a limited edition. You therefore sale at the entrance. There is a free offer starting from 100 Swiss francs. We made also another T-shirt for the Emotions Forum with a different motto, with a different image. You can find them for sale, Emotions Brain for org, and all the T-shirts are there, and you can buy them online. And of course, every little support from you is an honor for us. It's very important to carry forward our initiative. Let's resume our works in 20-25 minutes max. Be punctual. Have a nice break.
attimo riprendiamo i lavori, quindi vi invito a prendere posto. Io li ho chiamati adesso.
Li hai chiamati?
Sì, col microfono. E c'è Natascia che sta girando. Signori, tra un attimo riprendiamo i lavori, vi invito a prendere posto. Allora adesso una delle persone migliori che ho Bravissimi, bravissimi. Adesso... Come? Mi fai una foto con lei? Antonella, scusa, posso fare una foto con te prima che... Se mi accendete, grazie. Signori, vi invito a prendere...
Ladies and gentlemen, take your seat. Very well, we resume our works and our forum on emotions, and we are going to listen to another very nice, intense song, Luca Fraula and Micaela Calvano together, a singer. She will sing Gli uomini non cambiano, Bigazzi con Gianni Dati, whom we've known through the interpretation of Mia Martini, and tonight it's going to be sung by the beautiful voice of Micaela.
Sono stata anch'io bambina di mio padre innamorato, per lui sbaglio sempre sono la sua figlia sgangherata. Ho provato a conquistarlo, ma non ci sono mai riuscita, e ho lottato per cambiarlo, ci vorrebbe un'altra vita. La pazienza delle donne incomincia a quell'età, quando nascono in famiglia quelle mezze ostilità, e ti perdi dentro a un cinema a sognare di andar via con il primo che ti capita e che ti dice una bugia. Prima parlano d'amore, poi ti lasciano da sola. Gli uomini ti cambiano e tu piangi mille notti di perché. Invece gli uomini ti uccidono e con gli amici vanno a ridere di te. Piansi anch'io la prima volta, stretta a un angolo e sconfitta. Lui faceva e non capiva perché stavo ferma e zitta, ma ho scoperto con il tempo e diventando un po' più dura, che se l'uomo in gruppo è più cattivo, quando è sola ha più paura. Gli uomini non cambiano, fanno i soldi per comprarti e poi ti vendono la notte. Gli uomini non tornano e ti danno tutto quello che non figli delle donne, ma non sono come noi, amore, uomini che cambiano, sono quasi un ideale che non c'è, sono quelli innamorati come te. Grazie.
Grazie mille a Luca Fraula.
Thank you, Luca Fraula. Thank you, Michaela Calvano, for this beautiful song where we hear about the problems, difficulties of a woman in her relations with men, problems that stem from their relationship with the father. The next speaker will talk about the importance of relationship between parents.
And I'm very, very happy to introduce our next guest, Dr. Bianca Jones-Marling. She is a brilliant and passionate neuroscientist from Columbia University, where she is assistant professor, and she's member of the Zuckerman Institute at the Columbia University, and where she founded the Marling Lab. Bianca Jones-Marling is a world-renowned expert thanks to her research on the fundamental role of oxytocin, the so-called love molecule, in maternal behavior. And she's also very renowned thanks to her research in epigenetics. And I must say, we are very grateful because she's coming from New York for our forum. And tonight, this evening, she will tell us about this important research, and she will speak about the role of the mother and father in ensuring the survival of offspring. I will now hand it to Dr. Marling for her presentation. Please join me in welcoming her. Bianca.
Thank you, Clara. Buonasera. Grazie per avermi invitato.
Thank you for the invitation. Good evening.
That is my name, Bianca. So today I'm going to talk to you about the work that I've done in my studies and the work that my lab continues to study at Columbia University. It's an honor to be here today, and it's an honor to be here amongst women scientists who are doing brilliant and important work in serving the female community and therefore serving our community at large. And so I hope to share with you today the work that we do in the Marling Lab that edifies all the work of the people you heard prior today. So my work looks at nature, nurture, and the science of parenthood. And I'll start with a quote from a pretty popular bestseller book. Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it, from Proverbs in the Bible. Parents have a very essential and important role in society, and their role is to promote survival of their offspring. This survival is usually seen in one of two ways. It can be seen as nature, things that are instinctual, passing your genes along and passing that genetic code that helps your offspring survive. Or nurture, taking care of a child and teaching the child and training them in the way that they should go. An example of nature is this. Anyone who's hung around a child will know that they love to put things in their mouth that aren't always edible or beneficial to them. Whereas an example of here is of nurture. This is a non-human primate teaching her offspring how to forage for food for termites for survival. This is usually seen as one versus the other, nature versus nurture. And the work in the Marling Lab poses to build a bridge between nature and nurture to show that it's not just nature and not just nurture that leads to these changes, but the communication between the two that is essential for survival. saying much, you know how this little one is feeling. Little children have an ability to communicate even without words. And so we know what this little animal, no, this little baby's feeling. And this is what we call, as neuroscientists, her internal state. We can see how her internal state is. In this case, it's happy. Similarly, we don't need words to figure out how this little one is feeling. And I hope that you all will look at this video and think, who would let that little baby cry, and take a video of her? But that's my daughter. So similarly, where babies will cry, and we understand their internal state, and we'll go and take care of them, mice will do the same. So these are the little mice I work with in the lab. And when these mice cry, their mother will go to them and take care of them. In fact, what she will do is she'll pick them up and she'll bring them back to the nest. And I'll show you that here. In the lab, I removed a pup from the nest, and the mom's in the back with her other pups. And she'll begin to cool, she'll pick her up, and she'll bring her back to the nest. And she knows she's out of the nest because she hears the sound of the baby crying. Virgins won't perform this task. They'll ignore pups, and sometimes they'll cannibalize pups, which I won't show you in this video. But here's one of the most important questions that we decided to answer. The same existing cue, the sound of a baby crying, gains a different relevance, becomes a different type of importance after an experience. And this experience is the experience of motherhood. What regulates this? How does this change? And what does this look like in the brain? Our first focus to answer this question was this molecule called oxytocin. And I had a little bit of a beautiful a prequel to oxytocin, in which you heard its role, but also there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. So I hope to clear some of that up with my studies. So oxytocin is released from a beautiful part of the brain called the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus, and it's released from the posterior pituitary. It's a very long phrase, but if you will with me, take one finger and put it on your nose, and take the other finger and put it on your temple. Where those two fingers meet, that's where the magic happens. And mice as well will have this posterior pituitary here, and they release oxytocin in their body. And oxytocin's been known to play a role in very important aspects of social communication. So social reward, the birthing process is essential for the uterine contractions and for milk letdown, for breastfeeding. It's released in mammals during soft touch, eye contact, and it's been shown to play a role in monogamy. But with that being said, when you do a search on oxytocin, you may come up with a few headliners like this. One molecule for love, morality, and prosperity. Why the hype about oxytocin is dumb and dangerous. Oxytocin, schmoxytocin. Ed Young schools the internet on why the cuddle chemical is overrated. And I'll point out to say Ed Young is a very important and very influential writer in the US. And also, as you heard before, you can buy oxytocin on Amazon. I don't recommend doing it. It's not biologically stable. But I wanted to look into the hard science of oxytocin, given so much controversy behind it, but knowing it's such an important role in the communication of parents to offspring, specifically in females to offspring. We wanted to dig in deeply to see how oxytocin could play a role in changing this maternal behavior. So we did that in one of three ways. We first asked, what? Is oxytocin important for this maternal behavior, this retrieval behavior that I showed you today? Two, where? Given the fact that the baby cries, and this orients the mom towards the pup, so she'll pick it up and she'll bring it back to the nest, is a part of the brain called the auditory cortex, a primary hearing center of the brain, important for this behavior. And three, how? We have a neuromodulator, a molecule, and we have a part of the brain. But how do they interact to change the brain, to cause something that you may have heard called plasticity, which is an induction of learning, to change, therefore, behavior? And so we approached this question first, what? In order to answer the question, what, I did a behavioral experiment where I have a mom, so these are her pups, in a nest. And I have a virgin. We define virgin as an animal that has never given birth. We don't check out her like sexual standing or anything of the sort. It's not our concern. And we remove a pup from the nest. I then give the virgin 10 two-minute trials to retrieve the pup. She usually does not retrieve. I then treat her with oxytocin. And I want to take a second now to really orient you. We're not studying this in mothers. We're studying this in the female brain prior to an experience. Because even within two sets of females, we're getting two separate behaviors. So it's important to even study within the female system how experience changes the brain. I treat this animal with either oxytocin through an intraperitoneal injection, so into her belly, saline as a control, or through the magic of something called optogenetics, opto meaning light, genetics meaning your genetics. We're able to release endogenous oxytocin from the body, from the brain, the paraventricular nucleus, with blue light. I then place the treated animal back with the cage with the mom, and I test this every 3 hours for 3 days. So I had a very long study. And what I found was this. In animals treated with the injection in the brain, in the body, or through the light in the body that releases oxytocin, we see that more virgins have learned this retrieval behavior compared to saline. And I want you to point out that saline is not at zero. It's as if you don't have oxytocin, you're not doing it at all. We're not controlling for the natural release of oxytocin that happens when you're co-housed with mother and pup, but we're overriding it with a supraphysiological amount that allows for this behavior to become unlocked. And here's an example here of a video I'm showing you, in which we have a virgin, which after 12 hours, I'm shining the blue light. I'll see if after 3 hours, I'm shining the blue light and releasing oxytocin, and this virgin is now retrieving at the standard of a mom. So oxytocin makes bad babysitters, because they're not eating your babies, into good nannies. We then asked where is the auditory cortex, the hearing centers of the brain, the place of action. The auditory cortex is represented in the schematic right here. And what we use to target the auditory cortex is something called antibodies. And we've heard about antibodies a lot during the past 2 years. We're not talking about COVID antibodies, but we've used this as scientists as a way of targeting different areas of the brain. And we can look at different subtypes of cells in the brain. So here's an example image here. This is not work I've done. This is coming from Adeline, who's at a place called the Allen Brain Institute, where you can target different areas of the brain using these antibodies and see what the brain looks like in its morphology. Myself and my colleague, Mariella Mitri, created the first antibody to the oxytocin receptor. There was not one prior. And this was an amazing feat within itself. But what we found with this was amazing. And looking at the auditory cortical areas, one side here, we have 2 in the brain, we saw something that was astounding. In our left auditory cortex, every cell, little dot here is a cell, and in red, these are the ones that have the oxytocin receptor, which means oxytocin can work in this part of the brain. To find that oxytocin, something that's released during uterine contractions and soft touch and orgasms, is found in the hearing center, within itself is very exciting. But what's more exciting is when we looked at the left versus the right side of the brain, we found that there were more receptors in the left side of the brain than in the right side of the brain. And why this was astounding was that in humans, we know that for the left side of the brain, for those who are right-handed, the Broca-Wernicke part of the brain is the area of expression and the area of understanding communication. We found a communication molecule, receptor, that's expressed lateralized on one side of the brain in both mothers and virgins, which means that virgins are prepared to be mothers, but it hasn't been unlocked yet. So oxytocin, twice as many oxytocin receptors in the left hearing centers of the brain. We wanted to ask if left auditory cortex was that important given this distribution of the receptors. So in order to do that, I use a drug called Musimol, and what it does is it silences the left part of the hearing centers, but every other part of the brain is working. And we heard about connection and communication between the brain areas. And I want you to remember that as you watch this video. So I'm showing you now a mother who is a successful retriever. I've put saline into a small straw in her head to reach the hearing centers. And with saline, she still picks up the pup, not an issue. I then add this drug, Musimol, to silence it. I assure you the pup is still crying. And the right hearing center is still intact. But it's as if the message of distress somehow is not being registered in a mother that formerly was successfully retrieving her pup. It's as if we reverted her back to a virgin in her behavior. Given the importance that this discovery showed with the left auditory cortex, we wanted to ask a very poignant question. Can oxytocin in left auditory cortex change behavior? Only adding it to left auditory cortex, not just to the whole body. In order to do that, I use this called a cannula, which is a small straw that I can add the drug into the left auditory hearing center. And I treated virgins with oxytocin or saline, or through the blue light activation, released oxytocin in just the part of the hearing center, just the left auditory cortex, by shining the blue light. And what we saw, you've seen this graph before. This is what we saw with systemic, so injection. What we saw was exciting. Just adding oxytocin to the left hearing center only changed the overall behavior of a virgin to that of a mom. We found the targeted area that's important in the brain to unlock this important behavior. So the left hearing centers motivate care. Now going to the last question, how? How does oxytocin in left auditory cortex create this change? In order to do that, as I stated before, pups cry, and here's the sound of a pup cry in a sonogram. So it's plotted frequency here over time here. Are there any musicians in the audience? Would you like to sing this? No, it's okay. I won't make you sing it because it's ultrasonic. So this is above our hearing range. But if I were to downsample it and play it down, it's pretty precious. It sounds like woo, 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 woo. And so this is the sound that alerts the mom. But instead of having a pup there, I recorded it and I played it back with speakers, but thank you for your volunteering. And then what I do is a technique called whole cell in vivo physiology. A long word, but what this means is that I have the ability to listen into the brain, listen into a single cell, and record that single cell in that brain area. In order to do that, I take a small glass straw, I light it over fire, and I pull it until it's so thin that it's the diameter of our hair, but it's still hollow inside. I then put a paper clip in the other side, essentially, and I put a wiggly straw that I then put to my mouth. And then I go fishing for neurons in the brain. And when I find a neuron, I kiss a little bit, and it breaks into the neuron, and I can hear and see the electrical activity that's happening from that one neuron and listen into that population. So I play the pup cry, I record it from a neuron, and I look at the output of neurons, which in electrophysiology in the brain, neurons respond electrically. And here is a recording of a mother to the sound of a baby crying in the hearing centers of the brain. So I'm recording from this neuron, who's a hearing center neuron. And we see every time we play a pup call, we get these beautiful spikes. This neuron says, I've heard this call. This call is important, and every time the call is played, I'm firing at the same exact time, showing that the neuron understands the importance of this call. That's shown here in something that we call, which is a raster plot, and every blue dot is a spike that fell within 10 milliseconds of a spike, so it's very reliable and robust. Here's a virgin response. We get one spike. She spikes here or there, but it's not a robust or reliable response. However, after I've given oxytocin to this animal and I've paired her with the mom, we see that we get this time response that's reliable. So then the neuron has somehow changed to respond like a mom. And so our final question was, can we see this in real time? Can we see the brain change from that of a virgin to that of a mother with our own eyes? And that's exactly what we did in the lab. So I have an animal I'm recording from. She's a virgin. I then shine the blue light to see those activation of those neurons, and I'll show you the response. In the virgin, this is the response to the pup call. We have a few spikes, but not too much conversation going on with the cell. I then shine the blue light in the hearing centers, and we see similarly, not too much activation, but the oxytocin is being released. I then wait 30 minutes. I'm still recording from this area and playing this pup call, and I've only shown oxytocin for this short period of time, only in the left auditory cortex. And after about 3 hours, I've lost the one cell I kissed, and I found another cell in that area, and we see this. This is the same virgin that originally was responding like this, but after the treatment of oxytocin, her brain has changed and morphed into that of a parent, that of a successful caregiver. And we show that oxytocin turns virgin brains into a mother brain. And this work really helped highlight the hard science of oxytocin. And in truth, this article that was found in Nature was written about the work that we did. This work won Top 100 Stories of 2015, noting how oxytocin changes behavior. It was highlighted in Science magazine, National Geographic, and something that's pretty cool, the guy who calls oxytocin schmoxytocin went on to write this article about our work. But the reason that I study what I study isn't because of the press and the excitement that comes around the study. It's because when I give talks, I sometimes get messages like this. So I'm going to read to you a highlighted part of this email that I received, where it says, "I considered not going to your talk, as I was worried about the biological child bias, and my husband and I are in the process of adopting." And it's emails like this that really motivate my study, that I can have a woman who has thought critically about being a parent, but was nervous or scared about what that would mean in taking care of her child that's not biologically hers. And for our work to show that brains can be prepared to care for offspring. Biology wants us to survive, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen through the experience of parenthood, but through learning, through eye contact, through hugs. And this work would not be what it is without where I learned it from. I'm briefly going to tell you that this work is essential because there's high relevance of child abuse in the United States and worldwide, and the questions surrounding taking care of offspring really should be addressed. I won't drag you through the long English here, but I'll alert you just that childhood adverse experiences affect hormonal systems, brain development, immune system, our DNA, and even how long offspring survive, children survive, people survive. And we can read this in these quotes, and we can read this in statistics, but I learned it firsthand, and I give credit to these two people. So this is my mom and dad, and this is me, and I think this is my first birthday because of all the alcohol in the background. But my parents are two amazing people that continue to motivate my work in the lab. They are my biological parents, and they're also foster parents. So they took in children whose parents couldn't take care of themselves, who had to leave because of abuse and of neglect, and of things both within the parents who couldn't find it within them to take care of themselves, and because of society's reason, couldn't take care of their offspring. And so it's the work that I do here that I really hope translates into emails I get like this, and people who, unfortunately, have that gap in parenthood and caregiving, understanding the molecular mechanisms behind how this hype drug, oxytocin, works will help bridge the gap of communication between children and offspring. And with that, I'll tell you now that the Marlin Lab looks at senses, communication, and survival across a cell, like I told you, across space, but different parts of the brain, and also across time. Here is a video of sperm that I was able to extract from a mouse with a syringe, a live anesthetized mouse. So we can now look at changes in something called epigenetics and see if an experience in a parent can be passed on through generations, something that the lab is doing now. So with that, I'd like to thank the Frumke Lab, whose work I did the Oxytocin work at NYU, New York University, and also now my lab, who's continuing on that work, the Marlin Lab here. And I'll show you a video of one of my favorite retrievers. Baby cries, and offspring learns how to stop a baby from crying. Those are my kids now. And with that, I thank you so much for your attention and your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Bianca, for this interesting and captivating presentation.
Before you go, I have a question for you. Can men develop oxytocin as well?
So I fought between, do I include this data, do I not include this data? Okay, so don't be mad at me. Men have oxytocin receptors. They're slightly fewer than in females. However, when I treated the men with oxytocin every 3 hours for 3 days, by day 3, they still weren't retrieving. Nor were they by day 4. And I started getting tired by day 5. But at day 5 is when I started to see the retrieval. So fathers do have the ability to do this very unique behavior we're looking at, retrieve. It just takes longer. Now, does that mean that fathers are bad fathers? No. Other studies, not my own, but Catherine Dulac, who's going to be giving an emotions talk in London, her lab has shown that what fathers do is they'll eat every pup they see from the minute that they breed until 21 days after, and then they'll stop. At 21 days, that's the gestation of a female mouse. So they have their own protective way of ironing out who survives. And so we didn't see it in this study where we focused specifically on females because looking at males, we didn't see this change. But we also know that biology has it set up so that male have their role and female have their role, both in promoting survival. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you so much. Dunque, adesso vi proponiamo.
And now we have a contribution for a guest of ours. She cannot be here. She's in quarantine, Michela Balconi, but she was kind enough to record her speech, and we are going to show you the video now. She's a professor of psychoscience at the University of Milano and Brescia, where she heads the International Research Center for Cognitive Applied Neuroscience and also in Neuroscience and Emotions. She is the author of over 300 publications, and there is a Neuroscience of Emotions, the discovery of the emotional brain in the digital age, published in 2020 by Franco Angeli. Michela Balconi, she will help us understanding the wealth and the paradox of emotions.
Buongiorno a tutti, sono molto contenta di essere. Avremo modo di condividere un tema.
Try and share a topic which is quite relevant concerning emotions, which is the key topic of this presentation, and from a special perspective, we talk about emotion between bias and paradox, because we can say that the neuroscience offers hints for reflection, not only in highlighting how much emotions are important in our daily life, but they also sometimes offer conditions and paradox. The key points we're going to talk about range from the topic of the relationship between emotions and tricks, and how why we don't know our emotions. Through neuroscience, the most important aspect that characterizes our behavior. We'll see why emotions are ours. We experiment our own, but they're also in others. We live emotions because we live in an environment of interactions. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a reason to have emotions. By looking at this beautiful picture, sunny picture that you are very familiar with, showing the beautiful Lugano, we can certainly experiment some emotions. We can smile or express happiness for this beautiful landscape and sunny landscape. What happens? Why we feel an emotion? What are the conditions that make us feel an emotion? First of all, emotions are not the only experience we have. We have several functions in our mind, in our brain, perception, memory. We make a decision, we communicate with others, and we also experiment emotions. Each one of these functions, if we have to analyze them deeper, they are biased. For example, perception is oftentimes a perception which shows we see things, but we don't see other things. So there is a way of hiding, a hiding mechanism in our memory. Our memory lives its own life. For example, we remember things for a long time, and then we forget others, and they surface again. It's just when those who study decision-making processes, oftentimes the implicit decision, who are also conditioned by emotions, play a fundamental role, and also in communication processes. We think of non-verbal communication, gestures, the voice, etc. They are often hidden or even partly hidden. In this relation of even deception, we've seen that are unknown to us. We activate perception, memory, communication, but we don't know them deep in. There are implicit dimensions, I would say, and also when we talk about emotions, this implicit dimension is very relevant. There is a dichotomy between emotions and reason. Many say that emotions are implicit and unknown, that are part of our daily life because they are modalities of adjusting our behavior, which is against reason. With this scale, it is unbalanced towards the implicit side. When we think about emotion as a part consisting or characterized by implicit processes, which are also covert, we should also say that the emotions have these features. Emotions are something very articulated and complex. Emotions are multifactored. We see here these circles that are partly overlapping one another, telling us that emotions are a mental mechanism. In order to feel an emotion, we have to attach a meaning to what is happening to us. An event which induces anxiety or happiness. So mechanism of these mechanisms. So emotions is also a subjective experience, what we call the phenomenological component that we experiment firsthand. But emotions also have a strong component characterized by motivation. There is a drive to action, to take action. This driver leading us to take actions. Many researchers identified a very tight relationship between our emotional behaviors and the motivational drive. There is also an expressive component. We express ourselves. We have to express our feelings through communication, faces and voices. We can express great joy or great anger or apprehension. And then there is also a physiological component. Nothing like emotions, and the emotional behavior requires a physiological activation. Many functions of our brain, our memory, the perception does not entail major physiological changes, while instead happens for the adjustments of emotional conducts. Emotions are important, and we will talk about this topic of bias and the paradox. We know that in the species evolution, emotions acquired very great importance because they do specific things in our brain. For example, one of these components, a key component, is the amygdala. This structure, this subcortical component, very tiny, you will see it here in red, which plays a very key role, which activates, it illuminates even when we don't know, it sends out a message. So we can touch firsthand emotions. They can trigger alarms, warns us against a potentially dangerous situation, like or create physiological changes, and this is for us a very important signal. There are not only the amygdala, but there are also other structures like the cortex, the neocortex. You see the so-called orbitofrontal cortex, which is a part of our brain assigned to adjustments. This is the first paradox. It's true that emotions is something that erupts into our life. Sometimes we have a hard time controlling it, but it is also something which can be controlled, can be adjusted. In fact, the orbitofrontal cortex allows us to have a control or meta-control over emotions. This is imagined like a central control unit, showing that our emotions are in between something that is related to a more aware situation, unconscious or difficult to control, but we also have the ability of controlling it, of developing awareness, and have a sort of reins allowing us to adjust our emotional behaviors. Emotions characterize our daily life. And what do I mean by this? Well, for example, in this case, you see this picture showing us some very activating stimuli, objects or things. This dish of pasta, which is certainly stimulating our reaction, the activation of our smell, imagining the smell of this delicious dish of pasta. These images, from what we can say about these images, is that during our daily choices, emotions are activated in our mental processes. And they do so because they share neuronal circuits, parts of these circuits. And I'm referring of these very well-known circuits, which has to do with the reward mechanisms shared with the adjustments of emotional behavior, a series of structures such as the orbital frontal cortex. In this, it seems like a paradox, but in many cases, and we are not aware of it, but when we choose, we think we choose in a very rational way, in a very with great awareness, we are driven by this reward or mechanism, which are also driven by emotions. Here there are several components that would come into play, but it is an example of how emotions operate without us being aware, and how important they are to regulate our daily life, our choices. When we decided to buy a car, or we decide to buy a car or a bracelet, and it's a component that is driven our conducts. Emotions, thus, are something that we feel and we experiment while we don't see them. We cannot see them. This is a typical feature of emotions. The unaware part is like the submerged part of an iceberg, which seems to be irrelevant, but as a matter of fact, it is quite relevant and it is quite huge. We know that our brain has two ways allowing us to trigger an emotional reaction. Let's think about fear, like a way of helping us implementing a reaction in case of fear and that we are not fully aware of, something that was triggered by our different senses, and we are not aware, but there is an immediate response. This is a so-called low way, going from senses to explicit behavior, to the response, to the fear, to the us running away. There is another way, which is slower, and before arriving to the amygdala, which is like a central control unit for emotions, goes through the cortex, and so it emerges to our awareness. In this case, we are fully aware of what is happening, and why do these two ways exist? We see this why. They represent the entire physiology of emotions. This way, the one we call the lower ways, or the thalamus way, when we are not too much aware, we don't have time to think about what is happening. We have to respond, react immediately, and to protect ourselves. And so we go from senses to the thalamus, and then to the amygdala, which processes everything. And then we can implement a response. A higher response, allowing us to process in a more refined and aware way, and taking us to the awareness of what is happening. Why have I pictured this process? Because this explains a part of what we called the paradox of emotions, something we know that, but which goes through what is implicit, through a submerged world that we developed and we preserved in ourselves to allow ourselves to respond to different situations where we can feel emotions. But then we also have to react sometimes in a very immediate way. This is the summary of what I said: a stimulus, which is an image, or maybe even some treacherous situation which could trigger a sudden reaction. And so the amygdala starts blinking and requiring an immediate response. And the other way, we have a more rational path where emotions exploited the higher way, the one of awareness, can certainly be considered a rational response to a situation. And so it is not an antithesis between rational and non-rational, but the right balance between the two. This underlying dimension, the submerged part of the iceberg, can be seen in another expression of emotions, which is our facial mimic. We communicate emotions. We have to communicate to other people. We express how we feel. Emotions are a social event as well. And so while we recognize the face of the other person, we activate areas like you see this section of the brain, the fusiform free area, which enters into play when we want to express emotions. But also in this case, in many circumstances, our facial mimic is not so obvious. We use the so-called microfacial expressions of emotions, which go through an almost unconscious dimension. So we are not so much aware of communicating exactly that time of emotion. Here, the paradox is that our interlocutor, observing our face, recognizes these micro-expressions, which are unconscious or implicit. In this kind of dialogue and communication, oftentimes going through an implicit dimension. This allows us to regulate our relations even when we are not fully aware. So we have this so-called process alternating between awareness and not aware and unawareness, and which is also the priority method through which emotions appear. Here are some applications. We, with my research group and collaborators, are working with the International Research Center I'm coordinating. We conducted several researches. We studied this mechanism to read faces. It's a multi-technique methodology. You see this child, this girl, with wearing this with this NIRS, using this equipment, using this infrared technology, allowing to visualize in these sections which are the most activated areas. So we show how this girl respond in situations where we assume there is a pathology, and how they respond to stimuli. Even by delivering subliminal stimuli which are unconscious, and to see how the brain reacts. The brain activates the brain, but not only that. You see these tiny sensors fitted on the hands and fingers of this other person participating to an experiment. What we see is how our brain, and we are measuring peripheral index, not only responses to our brain, but also the responses of our peripheral limbs, increase of respiration, heartbeat, and so on, telling us how the brain, together with the body, respond in synergy to these stimuli.
Our brain, our body process these variations at the level of neurophysiology. Below you see the map of a brain. Some red areas were recorded through the EKG. Well, by combining these techniques, we can understand the effect of emotions even when the subject is unaware. Well, this is the last component which interests us, to talk about emotions in human beings and their paradoxes. Well, in a nutshell, we can say that emotions are ours, a subjective individual phenomenon. They are also social. They take their nourishment from society. They can regulate relations among individuals. They are useful to communicate, to stay with the others. We are never alone, even when we think we are the only one in a room. Think about the power of memories. And in terms of reactivating emotions, memory of a people, of someone dead, how art exchanges we had. Well, these are the situations where emotions are expressed at best, social events. Think how in terms of evolution, the relationship between mother and child is marked by this: emotions in primordial relations, attachment relations that is created as a lifestyle, as a modality. Typical of a mother and child relationship is fed by these emotions. A child is stimulated by the smells, by sensorial stimulations that are not only that. So we can say that the social dimension of emotions characterizes us because it gives a meaning to them. They've always been there in humans. They're powerful social glue to regulate societal relations. And in fact, they are at the basis of our relations with our mothers and fathers. We led studies, as you see on those images, where we used the paradigm of hyperscanning. What happens when people interact, when emotions occur? One of the first tests through hyperscanning, this is a situation where pilots were interacting, they were maneuvering. You see, in this case, we assembled the two headsets to record the EKG. These two headsets will enable us to hyperscan what is going on, how these two brains do communicate. What's the purpose? Well, to understand their emotional response, the control of this specific situation, the emotional control, which enables them to enter into synergy with one another, also through the interaction, continuous interaction, how we can regulate at best a cooperative behavior. The hyperscanning enables us to, second by second, millisecond by millisecond, if we use the time correctly, to control how these brains enter into synchrony or synergy. There's another example above. We hyperscan and say how they can fine-tune, develop a good empathy, well, among groups of people in team-building processes. Or on the right, you see how we study the ability in the evolution age, how cooperative strategies are developed. This is useful to strengthen, also to identify the situation where it doesn't occur. Our objective is to strengthen certain behaviors. I state that emotions are individual experiences. However, interactions are fundamental and certainly are a social phenomenon. They are useful for society, and basically they are social in nature. Hyperscanning researches are applied in so many sectors, professional sectors, like in the neuromanagement, how to apply neuroscience in a managerial context, and also in the sports environment, where the ability to fine-tune one's own behavior with others, to feel empathy, is basic. Think of a team or conditions where we have to compete. Paradoxically, we have to enter into other people's emotions and perform perhaps better than our competitor. The researchers applying hyperscanning are the main avenue to investigate behaviors like empathy, the ability to fine-tune, to feel empathy, which does not necessarily mean to feel others' emotions, but be able to recognize them, and the ability to read the others, their emotions, and then enact the right responses, the synergy required in some cases to support the other. And of course, the hyperscanning studies imply the use of complex techniques. This is a typical connectivity, the way we call it, connectivity, intersubjective connectivity technique. These two brains enter into interaction. We want to understand which are the areas activating in a synergic manner and those areas which do not enter into, let's say, synergy. There is also a neuroanatomical analysis to investigate how this synergy is more or less present given certain conditions. Well, having developed this landscape, so to speak, on emotions, paradoxes, and the implicit meaning or the underlying or covert, we understand that even appreciating such a beautiful image means to trigger complex mechanisms. Our species was equipped of a powerful but limited attitude. The study of emotions teaches this to us. In order to regulate our relations, we need them, and to develop even further this competence, which luckily was given to us as a natural gift. Well, I wish all of you a very nice evening. I wish you all the best, and I thank you for your attention. Very well. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bancone, for this very exhaustive presentation on the complexity of emotions. And I think it was kind of unique, the fact, but maybe not so unique. It is kind of evident and self-explanatory that a video presentation doesn't provide us the same emotions as being able to listen our rapporteur speaking from the stages tonight. She was very kind. She sent us a video, so thank her. Before announcing the last speaker for the evening, one last song. Thanks to the voice of Michela Calvano and Luca Fraula at the piano. Beautiful song, full of emotions. And tonight, the interpretation is special. The song was sung by Aretha Franklin. I Feel Like a Woman, Shania Twain.
Let's go, girls. I'm gonna tonight, I'm feeling alright. Gonna let it get out. Wanna make some noise, really raise my voice. Yeah, I wanna scream and shout. No inhibition, make no condition. Get a little out of line. I ain't gonna act politically correct. I only wanna have a good time. The best thing about being a woman is the prerogative to only define it. Oh, 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 go totally crazy. Forget I'm a lady. Men's shirts, skirts. Oh, 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 really go on. Yeah, the wind is high. Oh, 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 get in the action. Feel the attraction. Cool on my head to the day. Oh, 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 I wanna be free. Yeah, to feel the way I feel. Man, I look like a woman. Girl, need to break it tonight. We're gonna take the chance to get out of the town. We don't need romance, we only wanna dance. We're gonna let her hang it down. The best thing about being a woman is the prerogative to only define it. Oh, 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 get totally crazy. Forget I'm a lady. Men's shirts, skirts. Oh, 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 really go on, yeah, do it inside. Oh, 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 get in the action. Feel the attraction. Curl my head to the day. Oh, 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 I wanna be free, yeah, to feel the way I feel. Man, I feel like a woman. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, the best thing about being a woman is the prerogative to only define fun. Oh, 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 get totally crazy. Forget I'm a
Grazie mille, Michela.
Thank you, Michela Calvano. Thank you, Luca Fraula. Because you have announced our next guest, next speaker, last but not least.
She's a top manager, and she will offer us a very different, interesting, and enriching perspective on the topic of gender issues. She has an MBA from the University of Rochester, Bern, and an executive master's degree in consulting and coaching for change from INSEAD, one of the most prestigious business schools in the world. Until January 2021, she was a CEO of Baloise Life, after which she decided to follow an independent life path in search of the future of insurance and founded BeCurious.li. But the greatest milestone for her biography happened in 2014, and we look forward to her telling us about it. Tonight, she will also talk to us about vulnerability as an aspect of women's leadership, which is an important asset. Please, Angela Mattes.
Thank you so much for having me, especially Viviana and Clara, who invited me to be here, and also Antonella, who made this possible. I was very impressed this evening of all the presentations I heard. I learned a lot, and I admire you all for the work that you do. I will present something very different. I was thinking, when I heard Bianca's presentation, I will be more the mouse under the blue light who talks about her experience tonight. I try to make this transfer of what I learned about vulnerability into then also what I learned about leadership out of that. We are living in a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and maybe sometimes for us, not having all the answers all the time might make us feel imperfect or maybe even embarrassed sometimes. I'm going to share with you a journey, my journey, and hopefully at the end of that journey you will feel a little bit better with your insecurities and uncertainties. In 2014, I had an encounter with shame and uncertainty that strengthened my belief that vulnerability is actually a superpower. I am transgender. And when I came to Liechtenstein as the new CEO of Baloise Life Liechtenstein, this is the person that my team met. I was 46 years old. I had hidden my female identity almost all my life. I had traveled all across Europe for the last 6 years, living my Angela side on weekends in the privacy of being far away from home. And I had developed a personality and realized I needed to go the next step. But I was still afraid of my environment and how it might react. And this was not my first coming out. I first came out when I was 17 years old. But that was a time when there was no internet, there was no literature that you could read to understand what it means to be transgender. And I came out to my parents and I received anger and rejection from my father. And I received fear from my mother, fear that I would be an outcast, fear that I would have no job and no friends. And we had conversations for about 6 months together with a therapist. And it got more and more painful for me to always tell the same story, so that at some point I just said, it has just been a phase. It's done. And they were relieved, and I have no ill will against them for that, for having that feeling. And I was able to hide to the outside what was happening inside of me, and also a little bit to my inside by throwing myself into work, into my just starting career. But shame and the fear of discovery were a constant companion. And I define shame as the fear of losing the love and respect of people around you for something you deem unlovable and makes you feel worthless and powerless. But over time, I was able to extend my comfort zone and integrate more and more of my femininity in my daily life, up to a point where I knew I had to go all the way. And this coincided also with that I had just enrolled into the Executive Master for Consulting and Coaching for Change at INSEAD in 2013. And when you do that program, you learn a lot about yourself. And I reached even more clarity who I was and who I wanted to be. But you also learn a lot about change and how difficult change is for everyone. And I understood that I had all my life to get to that point where I was ready to make that step and make that transition. But the people around me, not so much. They were not prepared and for what I was about to share with them, and they might feel overwhelmed. I loved my job as a CEO of Baloise Life Liechtenstein. I was also very afraid that my employer might not be willing to let me transition in the visibility of that role. I have prepared a list of about 150 people that I wanted to talk to in the company. My superiors, my team, people I work with that were important to do my work also in the future. And also, of course, friends and people that I had worked with throughout my career and that I did not want them to learn it from an intranet communication. And I had my first two conversations on May 9th, 2014. And I'm smiling because the first one was with the head of HR. And he is a person of action. So when something happens and there's an issue comes up, he rolls up his sleeves and wants to solve it immediately. And I came out to him, and he immediately said, "Can I call you Angela right now? And let's do an intranet communication tomorrow, and then from the day after you can come to work as Angela." And I thanked him for his support, but told him also about the list that I had created and about all these conversations that I would like to have. And we had a long discussion because he said, "I understand what you want to do, but I fear that if you do that, this news is just too good. There will be rumors immediately in the company when you start talking about this with people." And for the moment, we left it at that, and I went to see the group CEO. And the group CEO was a person that I had known for years. I considered him a friend. I had prepared a lengthy introduction to ease him in what I was about to share. And after about 2 minutes, he said, "Come to the point. I think it is something important to you." So I talked about my gender identity and my wish to transition. And when I was finished, he relaxed back in his chair and said, "Thank you for trusting me and trusting Baloise with this. And you will see you will have the full support of the company, and you have my support 100%. We talked for another hour about a lot of things, about my experiences, my life. I also told him about the list, and he suggested that I talk to group communication and that we create a communications concept where we talk about the conversations, but also about the internal and external communication then when the moment comes. And that is what we did. And then the real magic happened. I sent out invitations to those 150 people. My team in Liechtenstein, I took together as a whole, as the team, as a whole team together after I had talked to my direct reports in one-on-ones first. And I went to our biggest meeting room. I created a circle of chairs and put myself in the middle. And when they came in, they were very nervous because there was, before I came to Liechtenstein, there was actually a very painful reorganization, and I had promised them more stability. And when they saw me so dramatically in the middle, they were fearing, "Oh my God, what does he have to tell us now?" And they braced for themselves for the worst, and then they heard something they did totally not expect. I told them about my life so far, about my identity, and that I did no longer want to hide it, that I wanted to live it. I also acknowledged that I understand that this might feel awkward for them. And I also tried to give them some hints of help. For example, suggesting that there were 2 restrooms on the floor for women, that I only would use the one, so that people or women who might feel uncomfortable, they could use the other one without fear of meeting me. And after I had finished with everything I had to say, the room was quiet. And then a young guy from the team in Liechtenstein spoke up and broke the ice by saying, "I know it's completely the wrong words that I'm using, but what you just did took a lot of balls." And there was laughing, and then the questions started, because it's one thing to know that there is something like being transgender, that you see it on television or read it in the news, or having your own boss telling you that he's transgender. And I answered all the questions as good as I could. And in the afternoon of the same day, the women of Liechtenstein came by my desk with a bottle of Prosecco and glasses and said, "We would like to toast to our new female CEO. And by the way, you use whatever restroom that is closest." And then also over the next days, employees came by my desk and asked, "Can I ask other questions?" Because it needed time to sink in. And the questions came later, and when they came, I again answered them gladly. When you open up yourself, make yourself vulnerable, let go of your shame, you also create a space where vulnerability is okay. And that was even more obvious when I had the one-on-one discussions with people especially with my direct reports, but also people at headquarters or in other business units. When I had these conversations, almost in all the conversations, something amazing happened. Because when I opened up and shared my identity and my life, they started to open up as well and started to talk about things they were afraid to talk about. Sometimes it was just that it was something between us that they said, "Oh, I thought you were gay, but I did not dare to ask. I was too embarrassed to ask you that because you never brought a girlfriend to one of our events." But others really opened up and told me things about their life they would never share at work because they were ashamed of something too, that they were not able to share. And suddenly they had someone who had shared something with them and they felt it's okay because this person knows what it means to be ashamed, and it's safe here to share that. And for me, those conversations were the biggest gift that I had throughout that experience. And the bond that was created through that experience we had together was one of very high closeness, and we are still very close today. And most of those conversations also ended with a hug. And with my employees in Liechtenstein, the way we worked with each other, the way we talked to each other, the way we made decisions, gave each other feedback, did our performance reviews, everything also changed and got to a much more real, a much more open level that we had together.
I have a question for you. Sorry, prendo un attimo il posto di Clara.
Take the floor.
I want to ask you a question on emotions. When you were a man outside and when you became a woman, did your emotions inside change? Do you have more manly emotion at a certain point of your life? And did you have more, because this is very interesting for our seminar today, to know if there is a difference. You probably took some hormones, I guess, through the change.
Absolutely.
The hormones influence differently. Capite tutti, vero?
Sì.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I always answer this question and say, like, I had a female identity. I felt a female identity inside all my life, but I also learned to hide it and to be a man to the outside. But when I transitioned, and especially also by starting the hormone replacement therapy, my whole emotional world changed, because I could feel my emotions much more clearly, and I also said that to Georgia in the break, is also that when you hide part of your identity to the outside, you also do not just cut off you sending to the outside, you also cut off what you are receiving from the outside. And this moment where I was not hiding anything anymore to the outside opened also floodgates to things coming in. And I sometimes describe it that my life went from a black and white movie to a color movie. The way I perceived things, suddenly I was able to perceive it, and I felt everything much more intensely.
Un grande applauso per Angela Mattes. Grazie, thank you so much. Devo dirvi che io ho trovato la sua...
I found her
story very moving. I really wanted to step in. One of the ideas that pushed me in organizing these events was also to do something different. When you attend scientific conferences, for the most part, you end up with 90% men, for the most part white, and middle-aged or even older. We are women. We should do something different. We should be inclusive. You've heard scientists, beautiful and very good young scientists, and a transgender a woman who is witnessing her story. And I think this should encourage us to see at reality from a different standpoint. And this is the goal of our conferences. The reality should be inclusive. We have to understand each other through emotions as well, and understanding the problems and the difficulties that go through a person who is born a man and feels like a woman. Sometimes they become the target of mockery and discrimination, but they are beautiful human beings, and I hope that these conferences will help all of us, because I'm first one to understand the world from a different standpoint. Clara, please come on stage. This conference was organized by Clara. She is an excellent organizer, and so I would like to take this opportunity to thank the entire team who worked with us. Marta Bocchicchio, she's the project manager in charge of the organization, together with the director Daniele, the singers, but also people at home. Luisa Capelli, in charge of communication, social communication. Sam Rughini, in charge of our website. Naomi Poma, Rossana Tanzi, they worked with us. Am I forgetting anybody? And the technicians, and thank you all. Next appointment is in Milan on the 25th of January in a beautiful location. We are very happy. We've been able to get some incredible locations. I would like to thank Isabella Lenzo for the luck. This location in Milan will be at the MIT, which is a new digital technology center opened last year, and which was funded by the Cariplo Foundation. Is the very first center in Italy towards digital, and we will talk about emotions in virtual worlds. So we'll talk about robotics, artificial intelligence, and how through algorithm we can capture emotions, and of a new technique called embodiment, which allows to trick the brain and make it enter into another person's brain. Great application, and the robotics, and if robots can feel emotion and can simulate emotion. Very interesting conference. I invite you in Milan to follow us, and you can follow us on our website, and I will give you the floor for closing. There is also a brochure at the when leaving the room. If you want to see all the programs of all these, we have the beautiful T-shirts, and we accept your help, of course, and thank you very much that you stayed for so long. Our guests, beautiful and interesting guests, and I hope we'll be able to meet soon in Milan. Thank you all.